Home is where the heart is. It's an old, time-worn cliche. You can find it crocheted on throw pillows, and it was probably hanging on a sign in your grandmother's kitchen. But it's certainly not the only familiar expression related to the feeling of home. For generations, homebodies have walked through the front door, looked around, and exclaimed, "Home, sweet home." In The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy proclaims there's no place like home. We're always searching for a home away from home. And there's nothing quite like home cooking. But whether it's where the heart is or there's no place like it, the concept of home plays an important role in our lives. In its idealized form, home evokes feelings of safety and comfort, a place where we can take off the masks we show to the world and truly be ourselves, a place where we are loved not for anything that we've done, but simply for who we are, a place to lay down our burdens and find refreshment and renewal. In reality, of course, the idea of home can be a bit more complicated. For some, it can evoke painful memories or conflicting emotions. When the home is not a safe place, you feel unsettled or unrooted. But still, we spend much of our lives seeking that sense of peace and security that comes with the feeling of truly being home. In this morning's gospel passage from John, Jesus says, "Those who love me will keep my word, and my Father will love them, and we will come to them and make our home with them." And that's actually an astonishing thing to realize, that Jesus will bring his home to you, that he will abide with you and make his home with you. So often when it comes to divine dwelling places, we think about that famous passage from the 14th chapter of John that's often read at funerals. "In my Father's house are many dwelling places." Or in the more majestic and perhaps familiar King James Version, "many mansions." But the point is, so often when we hear Jesus say, "In my Father's house are many mansions, and I will go ahead to prepare a place for you," we think that the kingdom of heaven is where our true home lies, that all of this is just a preamble, an opening act to our final, happy, heavenly home in God's eternal care. And while that is both comforting and ultimately true, it fails to recognize that Jesus has entered the world to make a home with you. He's not just preparing a home for you in heaven, he is actively preparing a home in you at this very moment. "In my Father's house are many mansions," yes, but you also are a mansion, a marvelously made temple where God himself has set up camp and wants nothing more than to dwell with you, to abide with you, right here, right now, in this life. So what would it mean to allow Jesus to abide with you? Well, the first thing to know is that you don't have to let Jesus in. Many don't. Jesus says, "Those who love me keep my word." And that when you do this, when you follow him as your Lord, when you are intentional about tending to your relationship with him through prayer and worship and compassion, that's when Jesus puts up a tent in your heart. Think about it this way. Ready or not, Jesus is showing up in your life. But when he arrives, will he be treated like an unwanted guest that you grudgingly let in and then overstays his welcome? Or will you open your arms and welcome him as a guest of honor? The good news is that it doesn't matter what condition your place is in. Your soul doesn't have to be in pristine condition in order to welcome Jesus, which is a good thing because, in fact, it never will be. Our souls tend to be more Oscar Madison than Felix Unger. Speaking of which, sort of, do you remember the white glove test? When I was a seminarian in Chicago, there were stories that in the 1950s, the dean's wife would do spot inspections on the student housing, both in the dorms where the single students lived and in the married student apartments. Mrs. Harris had a master key, and she'd barge in unannounced with her white glove and run it over the counters and dressers to make sure everything was spick and span and in order. I'm not exactly sure what her motivation was or what the consequences were of failing the white glove test, but I can only imagine she wanted to make sure that the future priests, and especially their wives back then, would all be up to snuff when they entertained their parishioners in their homes. It was a different era in the church. There were also rumors that if she spotted anything she deemed inappropriate in those visits, she'd snitch to the dean and get the student expelled. A little different now. All of which is to say that we do not worship a white glove test God. Jesus doesn't show up to judge us, but to love us. Because our God is an abiding God. God shows up when things look pretty, and God shows up when things are an absolute mess. Our role is simply to invite God in, to say, welcome, thank you for showing up, I'm doing the best I can, and I'm glad you're here. And God takes care of the rest. To continue our theme, in our passage from the Acts of the Apostles, we encounter Lydia. Did you catch that? You might have to look back in the leaflet, but Lydia is in there. Now, we know very little about her except that she was pretty remarkable. She was a woman of means, a dealer in rare purple cloth, and the head of her household, which was all rather unusual a couple thousand years ago. And she's particularly notable for being the very first recorded convert to Christianity in all of Europe. After hearing Paul preach the gospel of Jesus Christ, she and her whole household were baptized into the faith. After which she invited Paul and his companions to come and stay at her home. God had made a home in her heart, and she responded by welcoming Paul into her home. Home is where the heart is, perhaps, but even more to the point, home is where Jesus is, because he makes his home with you. There's an old quote from St. Augustine, who once wrote, "You have made us for yourself, O Lord, and our hearts are restless until they rest in you." I think that's the ultimate feeling of home that we all crave. That we can only find and experience that deep sense of peace and security of home when our restless hearts finally and completely rest in God.